One word made the alien queen blush, and now her entire species wants him dead. Zerath 4 wasn't built for diplomacy. It was a planet carved in fire where storms flash crimson and even the air tastes like iron. But Jonas Keller didn't come here for war. He came to fix a reactor. What he didn't know was that one misplaced word just, one would fracture, centuries of custom, challenge the cold heart of a warrior queen, and set off a chain of events that would rewrite the rules of two civilizations. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a threat, but he saw her. Not the armor, not the rank, just her. And for a race where emotion is weakness and affection is treason, that was enough to make her tremble, enough to make her blush, enough to turn her people against them both. Because among the Zorathi, when a queen flushes violet for a Terran, it means she must kill him, or claim him. He stepped into the core of the alien machine world, and time seemed to fold around him. The Zorathi base didn't hum like human tech, it pulsed, like the breathing of something alive and ancient. Walls of obsidian metal gleamed with embedded pulses of blue light, rhythms synced to frequencies Jonas Keller had never heard, only felt deep in his ribs. Then she appeared, Commander Vaela. She was taller than any human should have been, cased in sleek, violet-black armor that shimmered with microfractures of battleware. Her four eyes, aglow like molten rubies, studied him not like a person, but like a tool she hadn't decided was useful yet. "You are the Terran repair agent," she said, her voice clipped, metallic, and final. "Follow. Speak only if necessary." He followed. Not because she commanded, but because resisting her presence felt like trying to stand still during a starquake. They moved through halls shaped by logic no Earth engineer would have dared to sketch. And then into the heart of it, a failing reactor chamber alive with energy he didn't recognize but instinctively respected. The harmonics in the air shifted with each breath, each footstep. Alien machines, built to sing rather than spin, pulsed around them like a choir of silent giants. Vaela moved with terrifying grace. She didn't reach for tools, she commanded them, fingers dancing through floating interfaces with movements as crisp as they were brutal. Jonas, despite himself, watched. Not the reactor, her. And the words slipped out like breath. "That's beautiful work." The world froze. Not in metaphor, not in his head. Literally, everything stopped. Holograms stuttered. Text paused mid-step. The very pulse of the room missed a beat. She turned to face him slowly. All four of her eyes narrowed with an intensity that made his skin itch. "Repeat that," she said. Not loud, not angry, just cold, like a planet with no sun. "I meant your modulation sequence," Jonas stammered. "It's elegant." The word echoed, not just in sound, but in consequence. Every Zorathi within hearing range shifted ever so slightly. And it wasn't curiosity that stirred in their stance as it was the hush before a war cry. Her fingers twitched toward the plasma baton clipped to her side. And for a second, Jonas could almost see the calculations behind her, eyes measuring him, measuring his intent, measuring whether his life was worth the arc of her strike. Then she blinked. Once, twice, and said only, "Leave. Now, we continue repairs at first shift tomorrow." He didn't argue. He didn't linger, but as he backed out through the echoing chamber, one thought pulsed louder than the tech itself. He hadn't complimented her beauty. He'd acknowledged her genius. And somehow, that was infinitely more dangerous. 3 days passed, and neither one of them mentioned what happened in the chamber. The compliment, the silence, the unspoken tension that settled between every line of code and every calibration. Jonas returned each day like it was a battlefield, and Vaela, she let him. She never apologized, but she didn't kill him either. That, in itself, was progress. They worked in tandem now. The rhythm between them shifted, sharp at first, then smoother. She led through motion, not instruction. He learned through instinct, not manuals. Her mind, brilliant, layered, cold, revealed itself through the way she coaxed life from failing systems. She could see harmonics in motion, shape frequencies with a flick of her wrist. Jonas had never seen a living being think like that. Not human, not machine. He tried to say nothing, just observe, just listen. But something in the quiet cracked him open. "You know," he said, not looking up from the panel they were restoring. You're actually brilliant when you... He stopped, tried to bite it back. Too late. And kind of cute when you concentrate. The word hung in the air like a detonation waiting for permission. Time didn't slow, it stopped. The room seemed to breathe in, then hold. She turned to him, her movements precise, mechanical, and terrifyingly slow. And then it came. Not a word. Not a warning. Just the sound of air folding around force. Her fist connected with his chest like a freight cannon. One moment he was standing. The next, he was airborne, limbs flailing, breath gone, world spinning sideways. He hit the far wall hard enough to crack the paneling and slid to the floor in a heap of silence. Darkness swept in around the edges of his vision, like waves lapping at a sinking ship. But before unconsciousness took him completely, he saw her silhouette standing over him. Still, unmoving, her hands clenched at her sides. And the last thought that crossed his fractured awareness wasn't fear. It was this. She didn't use the blade. He woke to sterile white light and the slow, rhythmic pulse of alien medical equipment whispering in the quiet. Every breath stabbed. His ribs felt like shattered glass, his chest a collapsed structure barely holding together. But he was alive somehow. The silhouette beside the bed wasn't a medic. It was something older, heavier, cloaked in stillness that felt like stone. A Zorathi elder. Skin like volcanic rock. Eyes like dying stars. Scarin. He didn't speak at first. He just looked down at Jonas, as if measuring whether the broken human had earned the right to still be breathing. Then, finally, the elder's voice, deep and unhurried. She struck you, but she did not intend to kill. Jonas tried to answer, but only a dry rasp escaped. Scarin continued. That punch should have liquefied your organs. It should have turned your lungs to soup and folded your spine. But you're still here. He paused. She held back. Across the room, a Zorathi medic adjusted a panel with one hand and held a scanner in the other. He didn't look up when he spoke. And more than that, he added, with something dangerously close to amusement in his voice. She flushed, violet, from facial ridge to chest plate. Jonas blinked slowly. He didn't understand. The elder leaned in closer. Zorathi females, he said, do not blush. There was weight in those words, ancient weight. It's not conscious, it's not controllable, and it never happens unless... Scarin let the silence stretch until it became a shape all its own. Unless the body reacts to something it recognizes as an equal, or a mate. Jonas tried to sit up. A mistake. The pain was immediate and savage. She's killed males for less, the medic said softly, almost reverently. Warriors twice your size. One tried to flatter her once. She crushed his jaw and tore out his throat. Jonas winced. Scarin's tone turned almost thoughtful. You did what no warrior Zorathi or otherwise has managed in over 200 years. You made Commander Vaela lose control. He stepped back slightly, eyes never leaving Jonas's face. There are stories, he said, older than your kind's arrival in this quadrant. Stories of war-born daughters, carved in battle, bred for blood, who lived and died without a single moment of softness. Vaela was one of them. He let that sink in. Until you spoke. The room fell into quiet again. Jonas stared at the ceiling, the weight of the moment pressing deeper than any bruise on his body. He hadn't just survived a punch. He had triggered something sacred, something dangerous, and something irreversible. She'll return soon, Scarin said as he turned to leave. When she does, what you choose next will decide whether you walk out of here a man reborn. He paused. Or whether you become something neither of our species is ready for. The door hissed shut behind them. Jonas lay in silence. Chest cracked, heart racing. And for the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the realization that the minefield he stepped into had no exit. Only forward. She entered without a sound. No guards, no armor-clad retinue, just hair alone shadowed by the low blue glow of the infirmary's sleep cycle lighting. Even in stillness, she carried the air of a storm held just at bay. Jonas didn't speak, didn't move. Every nerve in his body whispered caution. But it wasn't fear this time, it was something else. Something older. Older than reason. Commander Vaela stood at the foot of his bed, gaze unreadable, hands hanging at her sides like weapons unsure of their purpose. When she finally broke the silence, her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't steel. It was quiet. "Do you know," she asked, eyes locked on his, "what it means when a Zorathi female blushes?" His reply came slow, shaky. "Apparently, it's either a death sentence or a mating ritual." She nodded once. No denial, no softening the truth. Then she stepped closer, the floor panels whispering under her weight. "I did not strike you out of anger," she said. "I struck because I panicked." The words hung between them like smoke, thin and heavy. "I've ended warriors for far less. I've crushed bones under my fists for a glance too long. I've severed throats for a word I didn't like. But you—" She stopped, her eyes narrowing not in threat, but in confusion, as if she still hadn't decided whether he was real or a hallucination that bled. "You didn't flirt, you didn't leer, you just said something true. And my body, this body that's fought and bled and stood alone for cycles, betrayed me." The silence stretched. He didn't dare break it. Then, slowly, she reached out. A single hand clawed, scarred, trembling, just enough for him to notice, came to rest atop his. Her exoskeleton was warm, not cold, not alien, alive. She looked at him like he was the riddle she couldn't solve. "You confuse me," she said again, softer this time, "because for the first time, I didn't know if I wanted to run from something or run toward it." His fingers curled gently around hers. And for a breathless moment, neither spoke. Because words weren't built for what hung in that silence. It wasn't love yet, but it was the shape of it. And for someone like her, that alone was terrifying. The first explosion wasn't heard, it was felt. A low pulsing boom that rippled through the corridors like the heartbeat of a dying giant. Then came the siren, sharp, alien, frantic. The kind that didn't beg for attention, they demanded obedience. Jonas was already moving. Pain stitched through his ribs, every step a reminder he should still be lying down. But the moment he saw the red alert flare across the ceiling and felt the tremor beneath his feet, something in him shifted. He knew what this was. The Vron Syndicate. They'd breached the outer defenses. Somewhere, deep inside the control deck, the base was bleeding. And if no one sealed the wound, it would die screaming. Down the corridor, armored feet slammed against steel. Zorathi warriors streamed past him, massive, fast, focused. And leading Themmer, Vaela. Her stride was a weapon. Every motion precise, every order sharp. Her voice carved through the comms like thunder wrapped in code. She didn't see him at first, but he saw her, and that was enough. He limped faster. Smoke filled the lower halls. Emergency lighting strobed, casting shadows like flickering ghosts. He stumbled through the chaos, dragging his toolkit with one hand, bracing himself on the wall with the other. Every console screamed warnings, every system blinked red. Then the ceiling cracked. A thunderous groan, followed by a cascade of steel and glass. Jonas froze. She didn't. Vaela lunged out of the smoke like a blade. One arm locked around his waist, the other raised above his head, her armored forearm deflecting falling debris as she pulled him out of the collapse. When the dust cleared, they were pressed together, bodies tangled in survival. She didn't let go. Her eyes searched his face like she was counting seconds she almost lost. Then, without ceremony, she pressed her palm to his chest firm, steady, warm through the armor. "Stay alive, Jonas." Her voice was low, not a command, not a plea, a truth. "I don't know what this is yet," she said, "but I'm not ready to lose it." He couldn't answer. Didn't need to. His hand covered hers, fingers curling over clawed knuckles. And in that breathless silence between impacts, they stood still, just long enough to make the chaos feel far away. Only for a moment. But it was enough. Then the alarm screamed again, and they moved as one. He didn't wait for clearance. Didn't wait for backup. Jonas dropped into the crawl space beneath the emergency bay like a man possessed. Sparks raining from overloaded conduits, metal groaning above his head like the bones of a dying god. The main stabilizer was surging seconds from catastrophic failure. There wasn't time to explain, to ask, just action. His fingers moved fast, wrenching cables from sockets, rerouting energy manually through emergency couplings that were never meant to carry this kind of load. He knew the risks, he just didn't care. Somewhere above, The Vron were breaching the south wall. The base trembled again. Then impact. A shockwave tore through the corridor, and Jonas was lifted from the floor like a rag in the wind. He slammed into the wall, skidding down into a haze of smoke and heat. His vision blurred, and then he saw it. A chunk of scorched, metal-jagged, wide, brutal falling fast. Straight toward her. Vaela hadn't seen it. She was focused on the console, recalibrating shielding frequencies, her back turned exposed. And before he could think, he moved. Fast, reckless, human. He lunged toward her, throwing his body forward with everything he had left. They hit the ground hard, her weight folding around his as the shard slammed into the floor where she'd stood. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then breath. Hot, fast, shared. She looked up at him, stunned. Not because of the blast, because of him. He was on top of her, chest heaving, bruised arms trembling, as they braced against the floor on either side of her armored form. His voice broke through the quiet, low and rough. "We're even now." She blinked. Once. Then her claws rose as low. Deliberate and touched the side of his face, gently tracing the bruise blooming across his cheek. Her thumb lingered beneath his eye. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Instead, she leaned in and kissed him. Not cautiously. Not as a question. It was a kiss that didn't ask permission. A kiss that claimed. It tasted like fire and smoke, like war and adrenaline, like something ancient burning under their skin that neither of them could name. And he kissed her back like the world hadn't just tried to end. Because maybe it still would. But not before this. Not before her. Not before now. The chamber was older than most ships in orbit. Stone wall sets with battle crests and blood oath circled the council table like a reminder. The Zorathi did not forget, and they did not forgive easily. Jonas sat beside Vaela in silence, his pulse drumming in his ears like distant cannon fire. The elders across from them sat motionless, their gazes sharp enough to split steel. Every breath in that room felt monitored, measured, judged. And then Elder Nakar leaned forward. "You've bonded with a Terran," he said, the words cold as obsidian. "Why?" Vaela didn't flinch. "He challenges me," she said, her voice steady, carved from iron. "He solves equations I cannot. He protects what I value. He listens. He does not flinch when I bare my claws. He speaks truth when others cower. I claim him." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was dense, alive with weight. Jonas could feel it press into his ribs, into the bruises still healing under his shirt. And still, he spoke. "Love," he said, "isn't about matching skin or strength. It's not about having the same blood. It's about who sees you when no one else does and stays." No one moved. Not a single breath stirred from the row of armored elders. Until one voice cut through the quiet. "Words," said Elder Jarrett, eyes narrowing, "are wind, easily spoken, rarely remembered." Jonas leaned forward. "Then remember this," he said. "She risked her life for mine. I risked mine for hers. That's not wind. That's fire." The old Zorathi blinked, and for the first time, smiled. Elder Nakar turned to the others. They didn't speak aloud, but something passed between them. A nod, a shift of stance, consensus, ancient and silent. Then came the decree. "The bond is recognized," Nakar said. "You will serve together." He paused. "As the first joint species pair assigned to the Interstellar Peace Commission, you will travel, represent us, show the galaxy what this fire truly means." Vaela bowed her head. Jonas exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. As they rose from their seats, the weight of what they had become settled on their shoulders. Not just lovers, not just survivors. Symbols. Weapons of change. The room was never meant for two. Not for someone her size, her presence, her gravity. Vaela ducked beneath the doorframe, her armored shoulders brushing both sides of the entrance, like she was stepping into a space made for ghosts, not warriors. The ceiling felt lower, the air tighter. She didn't complain. She just looked. Jonas moved around the small kitchenette, stirring the soup with a quiet concentration that made the steam feel like incense. He didn't say much, neither did she. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was patient. She watched him taste the broth, frown slightly, add something green. She didn't understand the flavors her tongue wasn't built for this kind of heat, but there was something sacred in the way he prepared it. Like it mattered. Like it was for her. And that was more intoxicating than any spice. He handed her the bowl. She held it with both hands, studied the rising steam. "This smells strange," she murmured. "You'll survive," he said. She nodded, sipped once, winced, then smiled just a little. And then it slipped out, soft and almost hidden beneath her breath. "I've faced beasts," she said, voice low, "with teeth longer than your legs." She set the bowl down. "I've watched cities burn. I've walked through worlds that screamed." She looked at him, and her eyes, usually hard, usually precise, were clouded. "But the thought of losing you tomorrow," her voice cracked, "that terrifies me." He didn't respond with words. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, not out of hunger, not out of need, but because she had let herself be unguarded, and that was rarer than any medal, any crown, any victory. She melted into him with a quiet strength, her breath against his neck, his hands on the back of her armor, the curve of her spine under his fingers like a road he'd memorized but never dared trace until now. And this time it wasn't instinct. It was choice. Certainty. Two souls, no longer circling, just colliding, softly, completely. One word. That's all it took. Not a weapon, not a threat, just a quiet compliment from a human no one expected, and the most feared commander in the Zorathi Empire blushed. In a society where affection is weakness and emotion is a punishable flaw, Jonas Keller didn't just survive. He cracked something ancient, something sacred. Through explosions in council chambers, blood oaths and shared silence, the engineer and the war mind rewrote what it means to belong across stars. She struck him. He shielded her. And together they changed everything. But this is only the beginning. Because now, the galaxy is watching. What happens when a human becomes more than a curiosity, and a queen dares to choose love over legacy? You'll find out very soon. If this story left you breathless, don't vanish into the void. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Because at Alien Chronicles, every story brings us closer to the edge of what it means to be human, even when we no longer are.